evening, September 30th, and we are all set to bring you the FloTrack College Cross Country Ranking Show presented by HOKA. I'm Ryan Fenton here alongside Ashley Tishins, ready for an exciting week of cross country rankings. Feels like the season's actually here now after this Nuttycombe weekend, Ashley. So much to talk about today. Super excited to be here. How you doing?
Goodness, I feel like I'm trying to still get over the whirlwind that was Nuttycombe. You know, like you said, we had Nuttycombe, we had Jamboree, just so many big results coming in over the weekend, and it finally does feel like cross-country season is upon us.
And this week, as usual, we'll be joined by our guest analyst, Matt Baxter, out in Flagstaff, who told us before the show it's beach weather in Flag. What's going on out there?
You know, it's unseasonably warm. It's amazing here in Flagstaff. I was swimming outdoors yesterday, felt perfectly fine. I know that that's always a sign of some of the cold weather to come, but right now I'm just enjoying running. I'm enjoying being with my teammate, and everything is pretty much the same up here.
And we got to give a shout too. I know you're getting ready for some racing season this fall. Race this weekend on the calendar, is that correct?
That is correct. I'll be racing the Twin Cities 10 mile with about 3 of my other teammates. It's the first race of my full season, so we'll see how it is. It's going to be a strong field, so I'm excited about it. Exciting.
Well, it's road fall season. It's cross-country season with so much action going on. And with that, I think we got to jump right into it. Ashley, I got to hear about your travels this weekend. Matt, your take on all that happened in this last weekend of September. And the first thing we're going to talk about is that Nuttycombe Invitational out in Wisconsin, where Mr. Parker Wolf of North Carolina finally started answering the questions on where he sits in that individual contention for that NCAA title. He led his UNC Tar Heels to a 4th place finish. So super exciting to see him out there taking it for the win. But on the team side, really, not I wouldn't say too surprising. You saw BYU out there and the Washington women both having convincing wins. But Ashley, again, you were out there on site. What was the vibe out there? What did you take away from the meet?
I mean, goodness, like you said, Nuttycombe, so many big performances here. I think we got to start right off the bat, right, with Parker Wolf, like you mentioned. He, coming into this on our own rankings, he was outside of the top 10, but he comes into Nuttycombe, takes first overall, sets a course record, 23:04 for 8K here in Wisconsin at Madison. So that was just super impressive. Now, the way he ran that race too, super patient, right? We saw Robin Kemmoy-Bear of Iowa State lead for most of the time, but then it was Wolf who at the end had more left in the tank and was able to come away with that course record there. So big stuff from him. Then, like you mentioned too, BYU team title. Goodness, they were dominant, right? They only scored 48 points on the day, destroyed the rest of the field, which included teams like Iowa State, who are ranked in our top 5 here. And so I think goodness, I mean, on the men's side, I think we just finally saw some of the big heavy hitters have the performances they wanted to have.
Yeah. BYU had a 38-second spread led by Casey Klinger, who was in 4th. Matt, what did you see out there? Finally getting to see some of these teams face off against each other, some of the big names on the individual side compete. What stood out for you?
I think the general crowd is going to be excited to see that Parker Wolf is finally getting a little bit of respect. I think people are having a bit of a hard time seeing him getting bumped back without doing anything so far this season. So, I mean, look, when you're breaking a course record on a course like that, considering the types of athletes who have run that meet in the past, I mean, that's just incredible. So he really deserves to be getting bumped up the rankings like he has. And I mean, those BYU men were impressive. For them to be putting 6 in the top 21 is huge. The thing I always actually like looking at, a lot of people don't necessarily look at this, but you should also sometimes look over at the B race and see who teams are putting into the B race, because sometimes those are guys who might have been hurt. Maybe there are sometimes guys who aren't quite ready to race in the top 7, but you still want to see how they race. And BYU took the top 2 spots there as well. So not only are they doing great in the A race, they're also loading in the B race as well. So they're definitely one to watch out for right now.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I mean, the depth that BYU is showing right now is pretty significant. And when we actually look on the women's side with Washington, we can talk a little bit about depth, but maybe not as much in the B race, but maybe some people they didn't run.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Washington, as you mentioned, they take this team title here pretty convincingly on the women's side, but they didn't even race Sophie O'Sullivan, who's one of their top athletes there. She competed at the Olympics for Ireland over the summer, so I'm sure she's still trying to get back into training there. But I think overall, when you look at that women's side, like, again, that is a big statement there. Utah takes second on the women's side, so that's the team side. But then I think individually looking at Sadie Sigstaff to Villanova, she grabs the win over Rosina Machu, Florence Karen of Penn State. Like, I think that was a big statement win for her, right? If you look at how she finished her cross-country season last year, she finished in the 70s, right? I believe she finished 71st at nationals. And so coming back now a year later, a year improved, bouncing back from that disappointing finish at nationals, she comes away with a win at one of the biggest meets of the entire season.
Yeah, another surprise out there individually, we got to give a shout out to Florence Karen of Penn State. Last year at this meet, she was 133rd. She was 182nd at the NCAA championship. She comes out to Nuttycombe this weekend, finishes second overall, which is a huge, huge run for her.
Oh, for sure. And I had a chance to speak with her afterwards, too. And I think she was still almost in shock by just how well she performed. And I was talking because she told me in her interview, she's like, this was not what I expected at all. And I asked why, and she was like, well, if you look at last year, I did terrible. So I think, she did terrible, like she said, last year when it was really rainy, really tough conditions. But this year, the conditions were perfect. It was sunny. It was a beautiful day there. And I think, she's one of the top big surprises here as well. But I think another individual, not to shift back to the men's side for a second, but another individual shout I want to give has to be Rocky Hansen of Wake Forest there. 6th last year in this race as a true freshman. He got injured at this meet last year and didn't compete the rest of the cross-country season. He comes back this year almost with a vengeance, if you could say, and he finishes second overall only to Parker Wolf. So I think that's also a good call out there.
Yeah. Matt, I'd love to get your comments on the women's. I mean, we talked about Washington and some of their depth, some of the, maybe Sophia, who they haven't run yet. But Amina Montag, who was in this race, she was 11th last year at Nuttycombe, 9th at the NCAA championships for Duke. She was back there in 27th. So even just looking at that, it looks like they have a bunch of room for improvement in a few different ways.
Yeah, definitely. The women's race was really exciting to watch. And as we're saying, I mean, the Washington women are showing why they've been ranked the second best team in the country. And you always want to make sure that some of these early season meets, if you are ranked high and you're a team that's expected to do well, that when you come out, you show that with your performances. And those Washington women really showed that at Nuttycombe. But I mean, looking at Utah and number 13 ranked Georgetown were not that far behind. I think if I were Washington, I would almost want to have had a little bit more room on those teams to show a little bit more of a dominant force. But I think it also just shows that Utah is really strong and Georgetown is honestly unexpectedly strong right now.
Yeah, and it's an interesting call out with Georgetown because they didn't run their number one, Chloe Scrimgore, who I think before the meet last week when we talked, you said she could have been one of the favorites to win. They sat her out. We'll wait to see when she opens up. But that's an exciting showing for Georgetown, knowing their number one has not even run yet. So that wasn't the only place there was action. You mentioned the Cowboy Jamboree out in Stillwater, Oklahoma, hosted by the Cowboys there. We saw a few things out there. I'd say one, Haptum Samuel from New Mexico broke up the perfection party by the Oklahoma State men. They tried to sweep 1 through 5. Haptum finishes second, so OK State scores 19. I'm sure they wanted that home course 15. But Samuel, obviously the runner-up last year, showed that he's in pretty good form. And then on the women's side, the New Mexico women upset the home team in Oklahoma State. But we see also a new freshman there for New Mexico had a dominant performance.
If you don't know the name Pamela Koskai yet, I think you're going to, and you're going to want to know this name going forward. She is the sister of Bridget Koskai, the former world record holder in the marathon, 2:14 there for Bridget Koskai. If you know that name, you probably should if you're following the sport. But goodness, knowing the pedigree she comes from, I mean, she's raced at World Cross Country Championships. Like, now having this addition here for New Mexico is huge. So she comes in here and she shows dominance here for New Mexico, winning at Cowboy Jamboree. And so I think that's a big plus for that team going forward.
Yeah, and New Mexico is without this weekend Nicola Jansen, the South African, who was 36 last year. Matt, the upset for New Mexico at the Oklahoma State home course, does that mean much, or what are you taking from that performance on the women's side?
I think this is similar to what we were talking about last week, where we were talking about the Nuttycombe Invitational, where when this is a home course for you, you do really want to win. And I think you're looking at that with that Oklahoma State women's team, is that they did want to win. I mean, look at who they had on the line. Look at how strong that top 7 was. I think that was the thing. And yeah, as you're saying, that New Mexico might have not raced a full strength team on the day, but I was impressed to see Oklahoma State's 5, 6, and 7 runners outperforming New Mexico's 5, 6, and 7 runners. So that's if you're going to take something from it. If I'm Oklahoma State, then I'm at least going to look at that and think, well, we have some good depth at the back end, and if we can keep getting those women stronger, then maybe we'll be in a better place to challenge New Mexico later in the season. But I still think, yeah, that will have been a tough loss for them for sure.
Ashley, on the men's side, when you look at the win there for Brian Massal over Haptem Samuel, what else did you see for that Oklahoma State men's team? Obviously, it was the dominant performance, but him taking the win over Samuel, and I think even a few newcomers out there for the Cowboys.
I mean, sure, yeah. I mean, it's only early season, but getting a win over someone who was the runner-up at NCAA's last year, that's a big move for Brian there. And so I think that's a big statement. And like you mentioned, we saw some newcomers here for Oklahoma State as well. We had LeBon Kipkemboy, who he's run 3:56 for the mile. He finally has his first cross-country race of his collegiate career, and he looked, he was part of that crew for Oklahoma State that just performed really well in that home course. So I think, we already knew that Oklahoma State was such a strong program, right? And I think this is just the early stages of, what we're going to see from this team from, the months to come.
We talked about the BYU depth just a moment ago at Nuttycombe. Oklahoma State, you look at the results, and if you don't know anything about the team, you're like, all right, great top 5. A little bit of a gap after that with the 6 and 7 or from 5 to 6. But you got to call out, they don't run Fouad Messaoudi, who was 10th last year, or a sophomore that on the bench right now, Adisu Gwadi, who ran 28:10 in the 10K, was 50th at the NCAA championship last year. So, Matt, when you look at just the caliber of guys they have in this race, the caliber of guys they have on the sideline, even with the BYU depth, is there anyone actually in contention with this Oklahoma State team?
Man, it's tough right now.
Going to see if this NAU bias comes out right here.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I'll sit here and say, you can challenge anyone on any day, I would also say BYU right now is coming up there to challenge anyone on any day. So, but I would definitely say that they ran this honestly kind of as expected. As we were talking about this, that realistically they'll probably hold some people out. They're going to make sure they do enough to win. As we talked about, it's really important to try and win on a home course if you're in a position to do so. And so they did that. They showed that they have a really strong top 5 that they can put on the line, and they even have guys who they can hold out and they can still comfortably win. And also them getting the individual title, I think that's something they would have been really excited about, because that's something you definitely want in front of a home crowd. So right now, I mean, that nothing much has changed. They're still the team to beat. They still showed that they're super strong, and that they're in a great place right now.
Yeah, Oklahoma State, again, the favorites right now. They've been ranked number 1. I think just the talk throughout the nation is they're the dominant number 1. And again, they showed that with the win. They showed it with a few people on the bench. But they weren't the only ones out there this weekend. The number 2 ranked team, the Arkansas Razorbacks, were out there hosting the Chile Pepper Invitational in Fayetteville. They dominate. On the women's side, the Texas women upset the number 22 ranked Razorback women. And, the Arkansas women may be reloading in some ways, but they still don't have their full squad out there. So some room for improvement, I think, from the Razorback women.
Yeah, I think if you're looking specifically at the women's results from Chile Pepper, that is the biggest takeaway so far, right? Like, Arkansas did finish 3rd on their home course. They get beat by Texas and LSU as well, which that's another big win for LSU. But, if you look at 1-2, Maya Cochran and Peyton Noe, they go 1-2 for Arkansas. So as you mentioned, right, they didn't race all their heavy hitters. Like Sydney Thorvaldsen, their top girl, did not run. And so then you have Cochran and Noe, who were among their top 5 running, but again, not full strength. They graduated some athletes. They had some transfers that were in their top 7 last year. So like you mentioned, it is a little bit of a rebuilding, but, I'm convinced, hey, this is just the first step of many to come. Again, it's a long season, so we still have plenty of time for them to improve.
On the men's side, Arkansas dominated, as we mentioned, not a huge depth in that men's race for them. But up front individually, Karami Yago, super dominant, sets a course record, the first to run under 23 minutes on that 8K course. Matt, when you see a result like that individually up front for Arkansas, what did you take away from that one?
Yeah, I mean, just seeing these course records are impressive. As we're talking about Nuttycombe and now here, it's just showing that these guys are ready to roll. Are ready to roll early season, ready to perform for the team. And I'm honestly going to be really interested to see as we go and talk about some of these rankings later on in the show here. I mean, Arkansas men ran great, obviously. But when I'm looking at how BYU performed at Nuttycombe, I mean, how are these two teams going to do if they were head-to-head right now? I think they would be really close because we're talking about the number 2, number 3 ranked teams. I think those two are actually closer than we think right now. So I'm excited to see how that all shapes up later in the season. And as you guys were saying, I mean, Texas women ran a great race. And I think that's going to be a massive confidence build for them going to Arkansas's home meet, beating them. So I think, the Texas women are going to be ones to watch out for.
Now, the last meet of the weekend that we want to highlight was the Grands Creek Invitational out at Missouri. We saw the Stanford men and women both win convincingly over, I would say, relatively mediocre fields, but the Stanford men placed all 7 in the top 18. They were led by Leo Young. Ashley, where does Stanford sit in all this right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at that, like you mentioned, even though it wasn't the strongest of races, right? They had a solid top 3 there, led by Leo Young, who again he's just a sophomore, right? Like he's only just now really getting into the thick of his collegiate cross-country career. So I think if you're looking at that on the men's side, that's pretty impressive. Then if you're looking, on the women too, Sophia Dudek did really strong for the Stanford women there. She placed 2nd overall, and I think she's coming off of a season last year that maybe wasn't what she expected in terms of how she wanted to finish at nationals. So I think this could be a big year for her, hoping to lead the Stanford women's team for sure.
And back behind Stanford on the women's side was Florida. I think they were a few spots back, but they had a great top 4, some new international faces, and they were without Hilda Olamoimoy, who was 4th and 6th in the last 2 NCAA cross-country championships at Alabama, so now at Florida. So Florida loses Parker Valby, but they reload with some fresh talent and a big gun up front who did not run. So you put her in there, Ashley, and you got to think Florida has a shot to win that race, and I think we'll see in a little bit when we reveal the rankings that might be reflected.
Agreed. Again, like you mentioned, they only finished 4th at Gaines Creek, but without Hilda, that's what you get. But then you add in Hilda, then I think that changes things. And again, with some of those newcomers there and how they raced this past weekend, I think once you factor in a low stick like that, I mean, I think not to give it away too much, but I think they're gonna, skyrocket up the rankings a little bit.
I do got to give one shout out individually. Ed Bird for Kentucky takes the win on the men's race. I admittedly never heard of Ed Bird before this weekend. 7:59 3K guy. Biggest win of his collegiate career, taking down that Stanford team, all those guys up front, that top 3 that Stanford had. So big shout out to Ed. But that was the action from the weekend. Again, so much going on. There was many other meets that happened, but those are really the highlights. And how does that all now shake out? It's time to take a look at the team rankings, and we'll start first with the men's Division I cross-country rankings. The top 10 as it looks today after the September 27th weekend. And when we look at that list, you see not a lot of movement in that top 5. So really no movement at all. Oklahoma State, as we talked about, the overwhelming favorite. Arkansas sits number 2. BYU, who the depth right there we've called out, sits number 3. Northern Arizona, we'll see them this coming weekend at Joe Piani, and then Iowa State. But then after that, Ashley, what happens 6 through 10?
I mean, goodness, number 6 right there, Wake Forest moving up 11 spots in the rankings, and I think deservedly so, right? They finished 3rd at Nuttycombe. They beat UNC. They finished just behind Iowa State. They finished behind BYU, right? I think that was a big performance for them. I remember afterwards, them and their coach, they knew that they had just had one of the best performances, already of the season, and they were super pumped. So not so surprising to see them move up so much. And then you go New Mexico at 7, moving up a spot. North Carolina now cracks the top 10 after finishing 4th there at Nuttycombe, and then Wisconsin at 9, and then Notre Dame at number 10, rounding out that top 10 for the men's team rankings.
Yeah, and Wisconsin and Notre Dame, we'll see them this weekend racing. Couple people we do not see in that top 10 any longer. EKU was bumped out after finishing 7th at Nuttycombe, and then Stanford bumped out. With that movement of UNC and Wake into the top 10, those two bumped Stanford just outside of it. So a little bit of changing there for really, I think, Matt, the first time we've seen some significant changes. What are you feeling after you see the shifting there?
Yeah, this has been the first, I feel, proper weekend of racing that we've had so far. Man, Wake Forest, that's a massive jump. That was a huge performance for them. To now be ranked 6 is something which they can definitely be excited about. Look, I'm not surprised that there's still, as you're looking at the podium teams right now, I'm not surprised that we still haven't had any movement there. I mean, Northern Arizona University still hasn't had their full lineup race yet. They had a team that raced in Tucson, but it wasn't the guys who you're going to see racing in Notre Dame this week. BYU obviously had a great showing at Nuttycombe and Arkansas, and Oklahoma State obviously had great showings. And even this weekend, if I'm looking at NAU racing at Notre Dame, I don't think they're going to be having a performance that's actually going to have them move. I think BYU's performance was strong enough, as with Arkansas and Oklahoma State, that I think as we're looking at rankings next week, I think it's probably going to honestly look pretty similar.
Well, we're going to find out.
That's right.
And if you want things to look similar, that's not what you're going to see in the women's rankings that we're about to reveal. So if you like the shifting that happens in the men's, let's take a look at this women's top 10, because it's another area where we see some movement. Up top, not so much in the top 2, Northern Arizona and Washington, but really the big story here, Georgetown jumping 10 spots into the number 3 spot, again, without seeing their number 1 this last week, and that's how strong of a performance that team had. Bumps NC State out of the top 3, still on the podium in terms of the rankings. And then some significant movement there for Florida and Wisconsin, Ashley, and Providence.
I mean, goodness, those are, I count 3 huge jumps here into the top 10 here for the women's team rankings. But I first want to start here with Georgetown, right? Again, moving 10 spots by how they performed at Nuttycombe. And I think that's factoring in. I mean, we still have, Chloe Scrimbour, even though she hasn't opened up yet, she's going to be a top runner, right? So if you're still factoring her in as your low stick, it makes sense that they move up to number 3, right? And I think then if you're looking at the Providence women as well, they performed super well at Nuttycombe with Kimberly May and Shannon Flockhart. I think having the cross-country season debuts that they were hoping for after having great track seasons last season. And then, as you mentioned, and we mentioned earlier too, Florida, they move up a bunch, again, because they've had some newcomers come in, and plus if you factor in what you'd expect to see from Hilda Olamomoy when she comes back and she makes her debut, I think we can expect this Florida team to be very, very strong.
I got to give a shout out here on Chloe Scrimbour from Georgetown. Again, hasn't run, but I get to listen to her in the podcast she was on with the Running Effect, and she was very, very bold. She was not afraid to say, wherever we are in the rankings right now, it really doesn't matter. Our team feels like we could podium and even has a shot to win, and this is before Nuttycombe. So without her team shows up, backs up that statement in a pretty significant way, and you see that movement in the rankings to reflect that. Matt, lot of big jumps in this top 10. What are you feeling after seeing that?
Yeah, I think the Wisconsin women are going to be the ones who are most excited here. And we had obviously McBurn on the show last week, and he was telling us about how his teams are going to be tied right now. That there was almost a bit of apprehension about, is it a good thing having them all open up this weekend for a race of this magnitude, talking about Nuttycombe, because he just didn't know if they were going to be in a great place to have a really good race. But clearly they were. I mean, going from 24th to 10th is huge for them. Georgetown women, as you're saying, moving up into a podium spot is massive. But obviously, with Northern Arizona University ranked number 1, we still haven't seen them, much like the men, we haven't seen them have a full team showing yet, but we get to see that this week, I should say, which is going to be exciting.
Yeah, super exciting to see the number 1 team go at it this weekend. But we're going to move to individuals now, because again, with this movement, are we going to see a similar thing that we saw on the team side? I'm not really sure. We're going to reveal it here, but I do know one that's going to be a big move here, and you see it there on number 2. You can't see the jump it made, but that's a 9-spot jump for Parker Wolf, going from 11 to number 2, and a little bit of movement inside there after that. With I think the biggest one outside of that, Victor Shitsema from Oklahoma State moves up 4 spots into the top 10. You see him, Abdallah moves into the top 10 for Arkansas. Ashley, Parker Wolf, number 2. Are we finally feeling he's where he needs to be?
I'm finally satisfied personally, so I think it's great to see him there now at 2, because I think we all can agree that he's going to be one of the favorites to contend for an individual title here. But I think also too, if you're looking at it, right, there's so much dominance when you look at OK State, Arkansas, they make up a huge portion of this top 10 here on the individual side, which just shows, like we mentioned, the depth for these 2 teams. And I think too, as well, seeing Brian Musai, who beat Hobson Samuel, this past weekend, he jumps him in these rankings. We'll see if that holds through the rest of the season. But again, he already got a win over Hobson Samuel, so I think that's a good move as well.
Matt, I want to ask you: is there a case for Parker Wolf right now to be in front of Graham Blanks in these rankings?
Yeah, I'm sure many people would love to make that argument right now, and obviously many people are going to be excited to see him finally back in the top 10 after being bumped out last week. And as you're saying, Ashley, I think it's super exciting to see Brian moving up there, moving ahead of Hobson Samuel, because that was a massive performance by him. And Hobson Samuel, we know his pedigree, we know what he's done, especially his 2650 10K that he ran this last season. If you're someone who can finish ahead of him, you're good. You're obviously very good. So I think he's definitely deserving of bumping ahead of him in the rankings right now.
Yeah, I think Masao is going to have something to say about that number 1 ranking too after his performance. But I'd say if Parker Wolf had to make a case for that, that number 1 spot, I think we'd just pour into Olympic trials 5K. That'd be the statement right there, right?
That's right.
But we are doubling the distance. So let's see. We haven't seen Graham Blanks really take off yet. Obviously, was in Paris running late into the Olympic Games. But exciting to see Parker up there where he deservedly needs to be. And with that, the women's individual rankings, top 10, how does it shake up this week?
Well, if you're looking here, really not a whole lot of movement, right? You still have the same figures here at the top. You have Doris Lemon-Gola of Alabama still at 1. You still have Hilda Olamomoy at Florida at number 2. We have not seen them run yet. Same for Chloe Scrimgore as well, Georgetown number 3. Salon Ildes 2 of Oregon at number 4, right? So we're not seeing a whole lot of movement. And the same too at number 5, Sydney Thorvaldsen. Where you're seeing the movement, right, is toward the back of that top 10, right? You see Nicola Jansen move up. She moved up 4 spots. Same with Carrie Beloga and Elise Stearns. They each moved up 2 spots. And then Rosina Machu, she drops down 3 spots. She finished 3rd at Nuttycombe. So a little bit of movement, but again, still we're seeing a lot of these same players here.
And with that top 3, not a lot of movement as we talked about, but a few of those we look to see in the coming weeks. I think we'll see Alabama this weekend open things up hopefully with Doris out there for the Crimson Tide. But Matt, on the individuals here, any surprises with the movement? Again, some NAU moves up there. That top 3 though has not changed. We talked about anticipation for this weekend. That's kind of what I'm waiting for on the women's side. Is when do we see these 3 shake out and go up against each other?
Yeah, that's the thing. When I'm looking at the women's rankings, these individual rankings here, it's not quite as exciting because it feels like some false movement. Like with our 2 NAU athletes, we're not going to see them until they race this weekend. So some of that movement isn't quite deserved almost. We want to see them race, we want to see them earn these spots. And so I think some of these rankings aren't quite indicative of where some of these women are at right now. We might have to wait maybe another week, 2 or 3 to actually see where everyone is supposed to be ranked on here.
Yeah, a few more things need to happen to really get the full picture. But again, first big weekend in the book. during this 2024 cross-country season. And everything just continues from here. Ashley, this weekend, another good slate of meets. Maybe not as deep as this last weekend, or maybe what we'll see in 2 weeks, but still a really, really strong weekend. What do we have to look forward to this weekend?
Goodness, I mean, again, like if you look at the calendar here, you have Live and Lou, you have Paul Short, you have Joe Piana Invitational, and the Loyola Lakefront Invitational. Those are 4 big meets that are happening this weekend. And if you look at the teams that are slated to compete here as well, there's some pretty big names, right? If you look at Paul Short, you're going to have the Harvard men competing there, which I think is a pretty big call out. Whether or not we'll see Grand Blanks, time will tell. If you're looking at the Joe Piana Invitational, you're going to have the BYU women, you're going to have CBU, Texas Tech, NAU, like we mentioned earlier, and then Notre Dame on the, kind of their home meet there. And then at the Loyola Lakefront Invitational as well, you're going to have Wisconsin, Alabama, NC State. That's going to be a big one we'll want to see, especially on the women's side. Minnesota, Louisville, Indiana, Duke, Cal Poly, Butler, and then the Texas men. So, I mean, shoot, I just listed off I don't know how many team names, right? So we're going to see many of the major players, many big D1 programs here competing this weekend after we already just had a big weekend of competition.
Yeah. I know I said it's maybe not as big of a weekend, but you get some of the top teams we haven't seen yet. If now all of a sudden it feels a little more grand than maybe I led to believe. So excited to see what happens this weekend, how things shake out. From everyone here at the studio and the FloTrack College Cross Country Rankings Show, we appreciate you guys for tuning in. Matt, we really wish you the best of luck this weekend. We know it's that 10-miler out there. It's going to be a fun one. Maybe, I don't know if it's going to be beach weather in Minneapolis, but let us know how that goes. And until next week, we will see you. Thank you for watching this episode of the FloTrack College XC Rankings presented by HOKA. Be sure to check in next Monday for more cross-country action, rankings, and results. We'll see you soon.